So that's the beginning of Fathergill. And here we are, piling stuff onto the boats to move the camp. Now, remembering that I mean, Fathergill was put up for tender. You had to, in your tender document, obviously state how you're going to finance building this new lodge. Well, at the same time, Daryl Mike Gardner, who is the head of the tourist board in those days, said, Rob, we've got all this money that's built up for years in the tourist board from the hotel levies that we charge, 2%, everybody to go to bed. And we don't know what to do with it. It just sits there. Why don't you apply for a loan? So at the same time as the tender was going in, that was stating Rob had got a loan from the tourist board. And the tourist board were being told Rob has got the loan on Fathergill, the lease on Fathergill. So they both sort of thought that the other thing had happened. And they agreed. And there we were, able to, we borrowed, they lent us 30,000 Rhodesian dollars, which was about the same as a US dollar in those days, which we quite carefully worked out to be enough to get everything started. Doesn't sound a lot today, does it? But it was enough. But it was tight. And so the safari little tented camp had to continue for at least 6 months while we did our best to get Fathergill up and going as quickly as possible. And here we are with quite a busy picture. You can see that the next one down, this is an armada of stuff just towing everything over to get the camp started. And here are our two, that's my brother Mike's son, two kids with the park's driver on their grader, driving straight through the Mopani bush to make an airstrip. Esmeralda, that some of you would have heard about, this great hippo that arrived, which I'll quickly tell you a little bit more about, but I'm not going to talk too long of it. Sans, with our youngest, painting up one of the Poland Daga huts we made, and at the bottom a little family once the place got together. So here's my darling wife. Absolutely the most amazing girl. I mean, that was that little Poland Daga hut that you see at the background. This was our home. And there was no running water. There was nothing there. I mean, it was just Mopani scrub through the whole place. There was no shade. We were clearly now the kind of focus of everything to get this place started and built in the middle of the bush, in the middle of nowhere. And here's this girl who just gave up everything to be with this crazy guy to get this all started. What a girl, what a girl. And so there it is, the beginning of it all. Up there, stuff piling up on the shore from arriving from the other side, looking like sort of a Dunkirk scene. And it looked like that for a long time while we sort of just got this all together. Now this great structure, today that's not a big deal, but let me tell you, back there, no one had ever built anything as big as this in a safari camp. And I was scared out of my wits about this thing. I thought, well, we need to have this great big place. And I built this all out of little bits of grass in a model and worked out every single little beam that was going to be in there, how much it was going to weigh and how we were going to lift it and get it there. No power tools, no anything, no cranes, no nothing. To put that thing up, the middle poles that went up at the beginning, there was sort of about 6 lines of poles in the middle there, had to go up to that level, which was about 6 meters above the ground, that just stood there in the middle of nowhere with nothing around it. So you had to sort of build up the whole structure. And it was quite a thing. And there was just me and Bunu's son, Michael, who was a carpenter that had come to join us. And we were really the only two guys who knew anything about building anything, and not that I knew anything about building anything either. And we had a huge staff of Tonga. We ended up with about 60 guys working for us, none of whom really knew anything about this either. So it was a very special, just teaching time and guys learning. It just doesn't happen today like this. You know, when you go in and put a place up like this, you've got professional people around and lots of money behind it. And it was an extraordinary venture that this all came together. Down here, building our bricks with our typical old Series 2 Land Rovers, which is all we had. Our kids used to love the idea of diving into this mud to where the guys built the bricks. And there you can see the sort of structure of the main camp coming up in the background. And just notice, I mean, this is all these scrubby trees. There was probably not a scrub much taller than me on the whole place. So we also had to get into planting trees and try and get the place looking a bit more thing. And it really was just a very, very exciting time, actually, of doing stuff with so little. And I just put that picture in because there were obviously other people around besides my kids that loved the rolling in the mud. But here is this amazing girl, really the hero of this whole story. Honestly, I mean, this is on our way down to the lake with our eldest daughter, Karina, who would have been about 3 years old, 2 years old actually, at that point. And yeah, Sands, she was something, eh? And that was the structure going up, which piles of grass that of course there was no grass like this anywhere in the whole of our surroundings. And this all had to be shipped down from Croy because all the closer grass on the Kariba Road used to get burnt every year. And the incredible logistics of moving all this stuff, of all these poles, it was a massive exercise. And one of the lovely farmers who used to visit us, you know, guys would see all this going up and they'd be on the lake and there was nothing else happening. Spurwing was there, fishing camp. There wasn't really much of this kind going on. And so this was a bit of a wahoo. People would call in and say, "Gee, what are you guys doing here?" We would be telling them, and they'd say, "What? In the middle of nowhere and the war going on? What are you doing?" And they would be amazed that this was happening. And this farmer arrived and said, "Well, how are you getting everything here, Rob?" I said, "Well, yeah, it's a battle, convoys and all of that." So he said, "Well, you can, I've got a 10-ton truck with a trailer behind it. We'll give you a hand." And so old Fritz Dollerman, who did all this, some of you from Dundara would have known Fritz, just lets me take his truck with his driver up and pile it up with all these poles. And I think we ended up with about 20 tons of poles on a sort of 15-ton rig coming back down. And I quite liked the idea of driving. So I said to the driver, "Can I just have a go with your truck?" And then we got into and he was very kind, and he, you know, I suppose he couldn't really argue. And he said, "Yeah, okay, boss." And then I started to come down. It would be quite interesting to see how this works, going down the steep gradients of the Makuti Road. And we had such a huge load on board that this truck just wouldn't stop. You can't kind of hold it with the brakes and you're sort of changing down through the gears. And eventually we were hurtling down this road in the bottom gear, but going far too fast, the engine screaming, absolutely out of control. And incredibly, we managed to get through without having 20 tons of poles piled up on top of us and Frick's truck upside down. And so all these extraordinary experiences where you wouldn't dream of anything like that happening today. And this was the only shade we had in the whole island was under this structure that we were putting up here. And this became now Sands's office, and everything that we needed to store anywhere went in underneath this. And this was the whole story of Esmeralda started here, because one night we used to sit up and have a little dinner at night under the structure. And one night I heard this kind of shuffling going on down the other end of the thing. And I thought, crumbs me, man. We'd heard about this sort of people coming across the lake. And although there was 40 kilometers water between us and Zambia, there was a fishing camp up the road. And I thought, I wonder if there's people trying to steal things. And I went down and suddenly found out I was next to this huge hippo. And we both had a look at each other and ran off. And I just had a little paraffin lamp. And the next night she was back. And that was the beginning of this extraordinary story of Esmeralda, which you'll read more about in the book. And how she became just an absolute pet hippo from being a wild hippo. And the story behind that all is there in the book, and I'm not going to go into it now. But that's the extent to which how great mates we became, that she could come in and I would say, "Good evening, Esmeralda," and she'd come and open her mouth and pour all that hot hippo breath over you. And she was a wild hippo. This was but we'll leave that story for you to pick up. And that was all part of this. And now, from rickety old tents, I didn't tell you that those tents, I mean, they weren't in great condition. And we'd moved them all across to start with at Fathergill, because you couldn't just start with a camp in the middle of nowhere. So the tents arrived, and then eventually we did build these pole and darga huts. We had an interesting time with that, because when you build these huts, you start off with wood, of course, sticks, before you put the darga on. And they would get eaten by the termites. And although you selected them as best you could, one of the farmers came along. We had lots of good advice from the good old farming days. And he said, "Rob, you should just fill up some drums with arsenic dip that we use for the cattle, and then put in the sticks which you cut green, and they'll just suck up this arsenic. And once you see all the leaves go yellow, you know that the arsenic's there, and then you use that to put into the wall." And it's fantastic. We never, ever had any termites into them. And it really worked well. Probably not the greenest solution, but it was great. So from those rickety old tents, here we are actually in great comfort now, with initially pole and darga huts that were the start of the accommodation. And here we are at the official opening, which was an amazing thing in 1977. We had given ourselves this 6 months. The tender came through, and in March, we suddenly realized we could start building this camp, and we had to have it all up before the rains so that we could get going. And in this very dramatically kind of optimistic fashion, we set ourselves 6 months to establish Fathergill. Well, of course, by the time 6 months was over, we hadn't established Fathergill, but we had closed, we'd set ourselves a date when we were closing the tented camp, and we were opening Fathergill on the 7th of November, and it wasn't ready. Most of the dining room was ready, but we were still busy kind of, as you saw earlier, with stuff piled up on the shore. And dear old Trail Garvin, who used to come in every year fishing from Mutari, arrived on the day that we'd said we would open, to find just an incomplete building site with stuff scattered all over the thing. And he walked up and he said, Josh, Rob, I'm so sorry, man. I think I've got my dates wrong, because anyway, and Sands and I were there to meet him and saying, no, everything's in order here, Trail. You just go fishing for the day, and we'll have it all ready for you by the time you get back. Now, the staff who had been hearing that we were going to open on the 7th had taken all this with a bit of a pinch of salt, suddenly saw our guests arrive. And it was one of the most amazing days, where every single guy in that camp suddenly realized that our reputation was at stake. And like a bunch of little ants, they ran around. By the time Trail got back that evening after his day's fishing, there was a chalet up, there was running water, the dining thing had been finished, and Sands had cooked a dinner, and it was just one of those extraordinary moments that he just walked up, kind of shaking his head. And it was very special, actually, very special. Next, so up there, this is our opening day now, when we first opened, and we invited all sorts of kind of, that's Mike Gardner, who was the tourist board. There's Dave Vermark of the tourist board. Can't think who that is. So these guys flew in. The airstrip was completed, and we were still madly finishing off stuff while Sands was meeting people, and I heard an airplane flying over, and they're, oh my gosh, and we're still putting cement on the plumbing, and Sands, you better just welcome them. And then we had this amazing time of just getting a camp up and running in the middle of the war on Fathergill Island. A little bit later, that's Ian Smith there. He arrived with a party to open the plaque of Rupert Fathergill in Kariba, and they heard about this chap building up a camp on this island named after him. So he came over with this party. They said, let's go and see what this guy's doing. And we got this message on Lake Navigation that they're coming over and they need some lunch, and we were very excited about that. And he arrived in that typical way, well, young man, you'd like to show me around here? And I was taking him around, and this, you can't really see a lot of it, but this is the harbor here, okay? And to our right, you'll see a picture later on, was the peninsula in which we sort of built the first few chalets. And the whole harbor depended on that peninsula. And I had built stone gabions, as they call them in the civil engineering world. They're big cages where you fill them up with stone to stop the water from washing. Got somebody doing a bit of construction work here. So I built these things to stop the water from washing away this peninsula. There's no rock anywhere in this whole area. And I picked up these things that looked like bits of concrete, which turned out to be a sandstone that crumbled once the water got into it. And so at high water level, all these rocks of ours just washed out of the cages. And Smith arrived, and he walked on, and we were standing there looking at the high water level, washing these, kind of taking chunks of our peninsula out. And it was a big problem. We were going to lose the whole thing in our chalets and all that we'd built. He said, you've got a bit of a problem here. And I said, yeah, we have it. He said, and he nodded a bit and said, I have to see what we can do about that. And he just walked on, and I thought, well, that's very kind of you, Prime Minister, to even think about this. You've got a war in your hands in a country fighting for his life about a little place in the middle of nowhere that Rob Fynn's trying to put together. And he had luncheon with all his guys, and they disappeared. That was on a Sunday. On the Monday morning, an airplane arrived and was flying around, and he just finished the airstrip. It hadn't even been properly finished off at that stage. And this guy landed, and we couldn't believe it. And out of it stepped a man from the tourist board, a man from the Ministry of Lands and the Natural Resources Board, and the Prime Minister's office. And they said, we've been sent down here by the Prime Minister to look at a natural resource that we hear is in trouble. And he said that you would be able to show us what the problem was. And I suddenly realized what they were talking about. And we took them down, and they had a look, and they made a few notes, and had lunch, and got back in the plane and flew off. At the end of that week, on the Friday, the Seahorse, which was the only big boat on the lake in those days, arrived with something like 30 or 40 tons of rock blasted out of the quarry in Kariba and dumped it in the front of our lake, of our problem, and came back every day for a week with another load. And eventually there was a breakwater of rock all the way across the front. And you'll see a picture later to explain that. And it was just, it probably cost more than the entire building of Fathergill did. But after that, for whatever people might have to say about old Ian Smith, I must say he was a fantastic leader. And that was a very special thing that he did for us there. And here we are with Fathergill open, float plane arriving, bringing people in, I think, to the official opening. Sands in her beautiful uniform, escorting them in to the new amazing Fathergill. And now, independence, incredible change of everything. Things started to pump from this absolute struggle to try and survive. We took off, and here we are towing. These were the Ford F-250 chassis that had been turned into, somebody here will know what they were. They'd been mine-proofed and carried guys around during the war. And we'd bought them. They just pulled everything off them, and we'd bought them as chassis to turn into game viewing craft, game viewing vehicles, which was there. And we call them Freds, of Freddie Flintstone. And it was just, they were the most amazingly fantastic vehicles. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? You wouldn't dream of seeing anybody today driving around on that in the safari camp. But everybody loved them. And we had all these old Series 2 Land Rovers. And it was very classic. I'm kind of sad that they've lost all that. Oh, I'm sorry about this picture. I tried so hard to make this better. This is one of the DDF ferries that have been donated to the country from Norway, bringing in a crowd of campers. We'd set up with Scripture Union these camps on Long Island. And they were very famous. I'm sure quite a few of you here today would have been on them. And they were just very special. Long Island is just about 2 kilometers offshore Fathergill, which we had put up a very primitive kind of couple of showers with a bit of water that could pump up to it, and camps. And so about 50 kids at a time would arrive here for a week and be stuck on a sort of desert island in the middle of Kariba. And we'd take them out and walk them around a bit. And they were very special. So that's that rather funny picture, is them arriving to be put there for a week. And at last, my darling wife has a house that I built for her. This became... So, guys, I'm just thinking about how we take for granted our wives sometimes. This beautiful girl of mine had lived now 6 years of her married life in tents and Polandaga huts. And at last, it was time for her to have a house, which we built in a very open way. Upstairs, veranda this side, there's a picture, I can't see the rest of it. There's a similar picture on the other end of it that turned into my office. And I'd look out from that down the airstrip, because we built a little way from the main camp so we could have a bit of privacy up here. and was sitting up there one day when there was a huge thunderstorm going on, looking down the airstrip and thinking, my gosh, this is the highest point in the whole island where I'm sitting with this house. And there was a tree halfway down the airstrip, which was the only tree left because Fathergill had been bush cleared by mistake, I think, when Kariba was being built. So there weren't any other big trees. And if lightning strikes on the highest point, it's either on my house or that tree. And the next thing, there was this amazing crack, and the lightning bolt came down, and I watched it hit the middle of the airstrip. And it looked like a landmine had gone off in the middle of the airstrip and went down and smelt all the cordite. And so clearly lightning has something to do with what's underground, not what's on top of the ground, just as a little side issue there. So here is the first house the Finns have on Fathergill. And this family arrangement, carrying all this stuff through, I think it was just so exciting to be able to build up a family, which nobody can do today. I think that was one of the huge differences about Fathergill too, all the kind of camps that one finds today. It was very, very much of a family affair. And here is the family. Sort of half the picture is lost, with Stanza's two oldest and our three little ones, looking out onto the Kanjedza River there, which is now being built up into quite a smart camp by the Africa Parks guys. And here is the school, Fathergill School. We had to have a school for our kids. And there were various other staff members who had kids, and there were even a couple of kids in Kariba who used to come across because they liked the idea of our little school. And we had teachers that we employed. We tried initially to school them ourselves, and that was an impossibility. So we eventually employed teachers who quite enjoyed coming out here to, and this was kind of what school was all about. It started at 6 a.m, sometimes with a bit of a walk, sometimes back in the classroom. We had Richard Whitaker as one of our guides, who you might well know is a headmaster of a school now, who said, oh, I'll be your teacher for a while. And he got up to all sorts of pranks, and the next thing we'd see him running down the road as we're going out on a game drive with kids chasing after him, throwing elephant dung at him, and they all had a lot of fun. And I would take them out for walks. You can see them at the bottom here. Running out of time. Okay, all right. I'm sorry about that. I should have warned you all about this, that we might go over time. So that's the family all grown up, from little ones at the top to middle ones in the middle to leaving school at the bottom. This was a big part of the whole Fathergill journey, was being able to buy an aeroplane and fly guys backwards and forwards. Tractor, refueling an aeroplane, sorry about that. So here's the final product, Fathergill Island. 60-bedded safari camp at the end of it all, a long, long way from that funny little old tented thing that started back in the beginning there.
Rob, thank you very much for a really interesting talk. It's not often at a History Society talk that the audience are laughing all the way through the talk, because some of your incidents I think we can all relate to. Over the years we've had similar experiences one way and the other. And also I thought it was good for my generation, at least we're part of history because it all happened in our time. So Rob, thank you very much for a really entertaining talk, and we look forward to the Land Rover journey in a few minutes.
Thank you.